The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturdays or Sundays, SOR Media, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of SOR Media is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced? Then come own the night with us.
Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all
Station atop the mountains of British Columbia, live from SOR headquarters. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, and on Spaced Out Radio on iTunes. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio.
Brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized.
It's Tuesday, January 23rd, Wednesday, January 24th, if you're on the East Coast or across the pond, and this is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a great day and night. I am your host in the captain's chair, Dave Scott, live in the Great White North on top of the snowy mountains of central British Columbia, right here in the Kootenay region at SOR headquarters. We are 150,000 people strong. Nightly on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and over 160 countries around the world. We're also live at spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Vegas, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. We're all over social media. You can follow us right now live on Periscope TV. Hello, Periscope. How you doing tonight? Good to have you with us. We're also live and on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio if you want to connect live with me. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, follow me at Dave Scott SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio for our archives. Listen to us on iHeartRadio in the United States. TalkStream Live. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download and subscribe to our shows from iTunes. And, of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. We also have a GoFundMe account going on right now. All you got to do to help us raise funds to improve our broadcasting system. To go terrestrial is go to GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night. That's GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night. Now, if you head to our website, spacedoutradio.com, you can go on to our Spaced Out Radio store, pick yourself up a t-shirt, poster, stickers, read up on the Encounter Online, dealing with everything paranormal, strange, and odd. We also have my latest blog on there as well, and great videos from UFO seekers and Contact TV. In 1933, rural Botetourt County, Virginia residents were attacked by a phantom menace. An invisible gas filled the homes of unsuspecting victims, causing illness and resulting in a mass hysteria that reached the city of Roanoke. Despite best efforts of local law enforcement, the Mad Gasser somehow evaded capture. Who was this Mad Gasser? Was he even human? We don't know. Was it simply a case of mass hysteria, or was there a sinister attacker responsible for these unsolved crimes? For the first time, this mystery from Virginia's past is explored by author and historian William Van Huss. We go behind the legend of the Mad Gasser, retrace the timeline of events, decipher the evidence, and explore the theories that have been proposed to explain this enigmatic cold case. In hour number 3, we are going to be joined by resident scientist of SOR, Eric Markham, who is going to join us. So, hello, Mr. William Van Huss, who is with us for the first 2 hours. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good, Dave. How about yourself? Thank you.
I'm doing great. It's good to have you back on. We just had you on a couple of months ago as we were talking about, what's the alien called all of a sudden? Why am I having a mind attack?
We were talking about the 1973 UFO wave.
That's right.
That's
exactly in the Appalachians. That's right. So, how you been doing since then? How was your Christmas and New Year's?
It was pretty good. How about yourself?
Busy, man. Very, very busy. Productive and busy. So it is all good, and yep, we are up and running, and we are doing great, for the start of the new year. So you are someone who loves these great little stories, who are someone who loves finding these small stories that have affected small town areas. What piques your interest in getting into those type of stories, William?
I think it's something that my interest was piqued when I was a young child. I grew up in the 70s and late 70s and the early 80s, and really in the 1970s there was still a lot of that in the air with In Search Of, and a lot of Bigfoot and UFOs and all these strange stories. So I would get all these little books when I was a kid, and a lot of them would be like Reader's Digest type books that were like compendiums of all these different little collection of stories, and I would read about all these stories. And that's actually where I discovered the Mad Gasser, was when I was a kid. Because this story has been in the back of my mind. I've always kind of known it existed, and I was recently, about a year ago or so, I was looking for more information on it, and that's kind of how I came to write this book, is because there's not that much information. So I wanted to basically make sure I had everything there is to know in one place that's pretty easy, that you can chronologically look through, see what happened, kind of lay it out in context of the time and all the theories and the possibilities of those. So I wanted to just kind of take that story, and I was kind of inspired, really. It's because it's kind of a cold case. It's kind of a, even though there's no one was killed, but it's a mysterious crime spree, really. And I was sort of inspired by the way I wanted to lay it out. I was kind of inspired by Philip Sugden's book on Jack the Ripper that I read years ago. It's called The Complete Jack the Ripper, where he just sort of gives you all the evidence that there is, that is available, from primary sources from the time, and not stuff that people have added in decades since, but all the primary sources available at the time, gives you all the evidence and sort of lets you decide.
How fun is it, though, to find these old mysteries that really haven't been dug up for decades, and the main population has really forgotten about, these legends and lore that maybe hit the mainstream news way back when?
I love it. That's really just what I want to do, is kind of just dig these things out before they end up being lost forever. Maybe just add a little bit more, to the data that's out there on these things, and keep them alive, because there are still mysteries and there's still questions to be answered. And some of them, and especially the Mad Gasser, I think it's very relevant. It's a story that's very relevant to our time in a lot of ways, and I'll go into that as we talk about it.
So when it comes to the Mad Gasser, as we're going to break him down for the next 2 hours and the legends that go along with it, take us back to the winter of 1933 in Virginia. Why, first off, before we even go there, why does all this weird stuff either happen in Virginia, West Virginia, or Ohio? It never happens anywhere else except one of those three states.
No, it's really a magnet for strangeness around here. There's some high strangeness that's been going on for a long time, and I don't know, but it is important to put it in the context of the time in 1933, because there was another Mad Gasser, and most people know about that Mad Gasser in Mattoon, Illinois, that came 10 years later, almost exactly 10 years later, actually. And normally, if you look up information just on the internet, you do a Google search, and you just read a Wikipedia or something. If you go to the Wikipedia article on the Mad Gasser, it's called the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. But I've always found that kind of unfortunate, because it's not the first, and I think if you want to know, you go to the source, So the first one that happened, I wanted to know if there was any connection between these two, or why this first one, because usually it's added, at the very end of an article on the Mattoon, Illinois incident. They will say something like, by the way, 10 years earlier, something similar happened in Virginia. But then when you get into the story of what happened in Virginia, there's a lot more to it, really, than what happened in Illinois later. There's more evidence. It lasted longer. There were more attacks. There's a lot more documentation. There's a lot less that you can blame on the media, because in Mattoon, it's very clear that the newspaper there was really sensationalizing this, and it's easy for people to just sort of dismiss it as being something that was blown out of proportion by the media. But when you read the original newspaper reports in Virginia, it tells a different story. It's a lot more reserved in the way that the story is told, and it develops a lot. It develops a lot more slowly. In Mattoon, it was like a 10-day period, basically, from beginning to end. But in Botetourt County and Roanoke, it was about 2 months. So there was a lot more time. But in 1933, Botetourt County, Botetourt County has a very rich history to begin with. Back in the 1700s, around the time of the birth of our nation, Botetourt County was way larger than it is now, and it was sort of an administrative point. It's very important. Thomas Jefferson designed the courthouse there. Fincastle was the county seat, which is actually later on where Lewis and Clark expedition left from Fincastle. Anybody who wanted to buy land west of Virginia at that time, when this is just after Daniel Boone had kind of opened up the Kentucky, through the Cumberland Gap there, and anyone who wanted to buy land, and you had people buying land, very prominent people were buying huge tracts of land, and all that administration was done in Fincastle, which is still the county seat of Botetourt County. So it has a really rich history coming up, but it was always a very agricultural place. And even in 1933, and in 1933, anybody who's student of American history knows that in 1933 we're in the grips of the Great Depression. This was supposed to be a bad time for a lot of places, but obviously it wasn't that bad of a time in Virginia, because most people, if you go back, you look at the census records at that time, most people didn't work in factories. They didn't work in mills. Although there were a few around, most of the people were farmers, and they would farm someone else's land and live in a house on that land, or they were just menial sort of labor on farms. There was a railroad through there. There were some railroad workers. And then there were people who just sort of kept there was a few merchants, there was the police, there was, people like that. But it was largely an agricultural area, pretty much like most of the Appalachian region, kind of cut off from those, the sort of big city problems, so it was sort of an insulated little place. And actually at the time, you have to think also there was no, communication. We get so used to all of our instantaneous communication now. Most people didn't have telephones, much less televisions or anything like that. So, you might live on this road, and then 3 or 4 miles down, there might be somebody with a telephone, So when something happened like this, it wasn't as easy to alert the police and have the authorities there immediately, within a few minutes, as it would be today. You were kind of on your own for a little while, so it was pretty terrifying in the wintertime to have someone, terrorizing people's homes and filling them with gas, and they have to run out into the snow and not know what's coming next, But that's sort of the scene in which this happened. The first attack was right before Christmas, on December 22nd in 1933.
With that history, I mean, there's a lot of people wondering how the phrase Mad Gasser even came about, because, I mean, that is such a strange name, but then again, the way the press worked back then, that, they would come up with these slogans, like everything had to have a nickname, whether you were a baseball player or whether you were some sort of criminal. You had to have some sort of last name, or, nickname. Mad Gasser just seems very, very intriguing.
It's a very sinister name, and I think it was more of in the original reports they call it ghostly gasser. They say they call it a phantom. They call it a gas thrower, and oftentimes it's attributed to one person. It's attributed to a group of people. It's been attributed to a couple. So it's kind of a broad term, but I think Mad Gasser was used more in the Mattoon incident, really, in the papers. But that's the name that stuck. Like Jack the Ripper was the name that stuck, not because it was Jack the Ripper, not because he called himself Jack the Ripper, but because someone wrote a letter, one of those forged letters that was sent to the police station and signed it Jack the Ripper, and it sounded good. So I guess it sounds, a lot of sensationalism to sell stories and stuff like that, but I don't know what else you would call somebody like that. If you're putting toxic fumes in people's houses, you must be mad,
In your opinion, because there is so much strange about this story, there are people who believe that it was supernatural. There were people who believe that it was somebody who was a little bit crazy and poisoning people with gas. When you looked at all the evidence, and maybe we're jumping way ahead here to hour number 2 type topic, but were we dealing with anything supernatural or paranormal?
No, I don't think so. But I think that we're I think that we're dealing with something that was very strange and maybe very sinister and very, really very inventive, I guess, in a really macabre way. But I think that the paranormal aspect of it gets sometimes associated with it simply because of the fact that no one was ever caught. That and particularly because of the Mattoon incident, because in Mattoon, later on, this 10 years after the Botetourt County, there was really little to no physical evidence whatsoever, other than someone, a fleeting sight at one of the scenes of someone running from a house. Other than that, there really was no physical evidence, but you find a lot more physical evidence in the Botetourt County case and in the Roanoke. So there's a lot more reason to believe that this is a very real crime. So we'll kind of unravel that.
Yeah.
Talk about the.
Well, let's talk about the suspect. Let's continue down this road here for a little bit here. We know it was a man, or are we just assuming?
Oh no, we don't really know. We know that. Okay, as far as what was reported by eyewitnesses, we have in Botetourt County and in Roanoke, and really there wasn't much in the way of eyewitness accounts by the time it made it to the city. Botetourt County is a little north of Roanoke. There's Roanoke County, and then there's Botetourt County, and the city of Roanoke sits almost on the border of those two, really. And in Botetourt County, this sort of started not in the very north, but it started more north and moved gradually south, and you can really kind of plot a line of how these attacks were moving. And they kind of went into Roanoke County, and then they finally end up, when everything reaches its peak, it ends up in Roanoke County, and that's where it kind of ends. But in the earlier cases in the spree in Botetourt County, there were physical descriptions, and there was at least one where a man was seen without anyone else. There were strange cars. There were a couple that left evidence. There were a couple of times that evidence was left that it was a couple, a man and a woman, because police came and found a woman's footprints, and there was and the victim saw a man run to a car that was running. So somebody was in the car, and he ran, jumped in the car, and they drove the car off. So that we have evidence that at least twice that there was two people involved. Then later, a little bit later, we have a man running out of his house and shooting with a shotgun at four people that were running away from the house. But I think by then, you're probably looking at, there's sort of a progression that you can really chart that of what was probably the most legitimate attacks, and then what was possibly copycat attacks, and then it just sort of blew up into a hysteria type of situation. And I think that when people, so to narrow it down, really, I guess, I think, and I give very solid reasons why I think this, that it was probably a couple involved, and this could have had something to do with personal grudges or something like that against specific families. Although every time that, in the earlier attacks, they would mention that the families said they had no enemies. But, who goes around telling people they have enemies? Especially when you're being interviewed by the police or the newspaper, you're not going to say, "Oh yes, I've wronged many people." So there's probably not 100% disclosure going on there when they were asked about whether or not they may have enemies.
When this person, whoever he was attacking, was he just attacking certain types of people? Was it the rich? Was it the poor he was targeting? Was it people with families or without children?
Actually, it's kind of across the board, but there are instances like in the very first instance, I'll just kind of walk through like what a typical instance was, what a typical attack was like. And that's the very first one is kind of typical of how it kind of ended up happening, which the first attack was at a man named Cal Huffman's house, and he had a family, he had a large family that lived with him. They lived in an old house, an old stone house that had been around since the 1700s, since the time of the Jefferson and all those people were around. But this house, he didn't own this house. This house was owned by a man who owned all the land. So this man had money. His name was Henderson, and he owned the land. But this guy just lived in this house on that land, sort of adjacent to the Henderson home, and did farming for the Henderson family. So the first attack was at his house. So it's entirely possible that it could have been meant for the other guy, But it was at this house. His wife began to smell, December 22nd, you can imagine, very quiet. You're in the foothills of the mountains there. You're alone. You're not expecting anything like this at all. It's not been done before. This is the first instance of this. You can't go back. Really, I've not been able to find anything earlier where somebody is using gas to attack people. Although there are several later. But his wife begins to smell a strange odor in the house. It's kind of making her nauseous a little bit. She tells him about it. He's like, okay, it goes away. They try to air the house out, She's like, okay, well, I'm going to go to bed. She goes to bed. The odor comes back. The second time the odor comes back, it makes everybody in the house sick. And his daughter is violent, becomes ill, really more than anybody else. But the sickness, the kind of ill that we're talking about, the kind of symptoms they had are burning eyes, burning nose, their throat, their lungs. It's just a caustic gas that's in the house. He sends for the police. They don't have a telephone. He sends for the police. They air the house out. Everybody goes out into the yard. And then the police come. He sits with the policemen, and a doctor comes as well. The policeman's name was, he was Special Officer Lemon was his name, and the doctor's name was Dr. Driver. They come. Driver checks the family out. He makes note of their symptoms. He tries to kind of discern what kind of gas this was. The policeman sits there with them. They, till everything's kind of calmed down. They don't think anything, the attacker's not still there. They walk around. They look for him. They don't find anything. Finally, they send for the neighbor boy to come and sit with the father up. They're going to sit up the rest of the night and let everybody else sleep. So no sooner than the policeman leaves, there's a third wave of gas coming through the house. But they weren't able to spot the person who did it. These doctors at the time, and a lot of times you go through, as you go through all these stories, the doctors constantly trying to figure out what kind of gas, because that's what everybody wants to know. It started that night, but it didn't go on. It took a few nights for the next one to happen, and it wasn't a huge story at first. But one of the main questions was people want to know what, obviously what is this person doing? What type of gas is this? And they started trying to narrow the gas down over a period of time. There was chlorine was suspected. Carbon dioxide was suspected. Formaldehyde was suspected over time. And even a mixture of these gases, because they were the ones that could have caused sort of symptoms like this, with the irritation of mucous membranes. Of course, by the time you get to Roanoke, you start finding different symptoms where people are saying they have chest pains and things like that, things that can't be attributed and don't sound like the earlier attacks. And I think that's when you had gotten to a hysteria point where they didn't really know the details of the earlier attacks, and they were maybe experiencing things that were not, legitimately caused by gas. And in the Mattoon attacks 10 years later, you have very different symptoms. The symptoms up there were vomiting and numbness and things like that. So, it's not entirely, a lot of times, even though people try to, even though there's not a lot of evidence, there's no evidence, really, no physical evidence or nothing to go on other than coincidence to connect those two attacks between Virginia and Botetourt County and Mattoon, Illinois. It's not impossible that it could have been the same person or people later on who had maybe perfected their technique or done something different, experimenting different, because, there's certainly evidence to show in Virginia that the gas may have been altered over time, to be to achieve a different effect.
Did anybody ever die from this?
No, there were never any deaths from it. It was mostly just it was sort of a really, sort of a terrorist situation. I mean, it's a domestic terrorism thing, really. And that's one of the reasons that it's kind of relevant to our time. And the other reason is really the aspect of mass hysteria. People, and I've been guilty of this, many times too. When you hear the phrase mass hysteria, the term mass hysteria, you immediately think, oh, there's nothing to it, or, oh, that was nothing, if you hear that phrase. But it's really not the case. I mean, sometimes it is, like if you're talking about the Salem witch trials, in mass hysteria, in that case was, kind of something out of nothing, but in a lot of mass hysteria cases, there is something, there really is something, but the mass hysteria is the reaction of the public to that something. So I think that's sort of relevant to our time, because we kind of, in our day and age, we kind of live in a constant state of mass hysteria, going from one thing to another. And then these things, mass hysteria kind of runs a course. And once it reaches the most fevered pitch that it can reach, it kind of fizzles out because people don't have any more energy to give to it. And then people move on to the next thing to be hysterical about.
Was there any talk of multiple gassers, like maybe a team of these gentlemen who would get together and hit different communities or cities with this gas?
Well, in the Botetourt County case, I think that there was probably, and there was a lot of talk about. There was talk about people, at first, in the first, maybe, I mean, and in Virginia there were probably around 20 or so cases, and in the first ones, people took it very seriously. After a while, they still took it seriously, but they started considering it maybe that it was a prank, or that it was maybe groups of young kids or something were doing it. I tend to think that it was probably copycat, because a lot of times when things happen like this, obviously there are people who take advantage of that people are afraid, and then they want to, scare people too. So I think that, in some of the cases where you would have groups like that, the 4 men that were running away from one of the victims' houses, and they ran into the woods, he took a shot at him with a shotgun. I think some of those were probably, and there was another one where a girl saw 4 strange guys on the side of the road, that were kind of, that she got a really bad vibe from. And I think some of those things probably were copycat situations, and they were actual pranks. There were a couple of prank ones where people would just try to terrorize somebody by throwing a insect killer through their window, and then they would run screaming. There's one woman ran screaming from her house because somebody ran up to her house and threw a bottle, like a jar, into her kitchen, and it was some sort of smelly liquid, and it was quickly deduced that this wasn't anything that was really dangerous. It was just bug spray. So there were a couple of instances like that. So there were people that were definitely taking advantage of the situation to scare people for their own weird jollies. But there was definitely a difference between those instances, between the attacks, between the effects of whatever the gas was, between the descriptions of the people. And there weren't a lot of, probably not, I'm guessing, not a lot of strangers in the county, so I think you would have been pretty obvious if you were going town to town. So we're probably looking at somebody who was from that community.
Do we have any type of eyewitness understanding of who this gentleman or gentlemen were? Was there anybody who saw more than just a glimpse of a shadow?
Well, there were people who saw. There was one attack at a house where a man's dog started barking, and his house had actually not been gassed, but his dog started barking, and he wondered what it was, and he went outside, and he looked across the yard, and right near the road there was a ditch. It was like a kind of a deep sort of, like the ground kind of went down into a ditch, and there was a tree there, and he saw a man's head over there, and like hiding behind the ditch, like watching his house. Later on, when the police came, they saw that, it was obvious that somebody had been there, and they had been there a while too, like scoping this guy's house out. There were the times when a car was seen, or a strange car, and that later that night, actually, the car came by that man's house with the headlights off. There was one piece of physical evidence that was found related to a car, which was a crank from the front of a car, like the old style crank in the car to start it cranks. There was a crank that was found, and it was determined to be from an Overland, which there used to be an automobile company called Overland Automobiles, and they went out of business in 1926. So 7 years earlier, but I imagine there were still a few of them on the road at that time, although they were probably looking a little dated by then, because if you look at pictures of Overland cars, they could look more like that kind of that old open wheel buggy kind of looking car, as opposed to by the 1930s you were starting to get those sort of slick, sort of gangster looking vehicles. So there was one of the crank was found was from one of those. So that narrows it down a little bit. There was also there was also a car that was seen on one night. The Mad Gasser went around an area called Carvin's Cove, and that today that little community there has been, not too long after this happened, actually, that little community was flooded to make a lake, a man-made lake. And then today the Appalachian Trail runs through there. It's a really beautiful scenic area, and people go there and do boating and fishing and all kinds of recreational outdoor activities and stuff. But at the time, it was a little sort of tiny community in this hollow out there. And the Mad Gasser went there and sort of did a string of attacks there. And where the police tried to actually block all the entrances and exits on the roads to try to curtail him. And then they got one description of a car, and they got a license plate number. And that's actually the only person that was ever taken in for questioning over it. And for some reason, and I can't find out why, the police determined that he had nothing to do with it and let him go. But that was the only that's the only suspect that was ever actually taken in.
Was that suspect arrested, or was he charged with anything?
No, he was brought to Roanoke and questioned. This was later. They found him, after that license plate was given to him. He was brought to Roanoke and questioned by the Roanoke police and the Botetourt County Sheriff's Office, and but they all seem to agree that it was just a case of mistaken identity and that he had nothing to do with it.
So if they thought this guy had been on the attack and he matched the description of the vehicle and everything, how did they drop the ball on that one? Did they think that maybe he had, dropped off his gas equipment or anything along those lines?
I don't know. I think it was just I think they must have just sort of believed that, because it really wasn't a description that matching the other descriptions of the vehicle or the person. It was just that I think it was just a case of where there was a strange vehicle that was seen, that, and everybody was in this state of panic because it was happening at the time, and they were like, "Who's that going down the road?" Somebody jotted the license plate number down, and then they found out maybe this guy had a legitimate reason for being there, and or maybe they got another call while they were interviewing him for another attack. But it's difficult to say because we can't have any, we can't find any transcripts from that kind of thing. Like you don't have a stenographer sitting there taking everything down every time you question someone. So I don't really, I don't know what made them determine that, but I have to kind of guess. I guess we just kind of have to trust their judgment on that one. Just like with the doctors, trying to determine these gases and stuff. You can be a well-trained physician, but you're not ready for that. I mean, you can be trained in like how to treat someone at a scene for X number of things, but if it's never happened before, you can't be expected to know every chemical compound. So, sometimes you just have to trust the people who are doing the job, I guess, enough that it would be nice to know more about this person who we get no other word about, and we have no other people that were ever taken in for it. Although it seems like at that time, it seems like the Mad Gasser, just other than that piece of evidence and on that one little spree that he did through that community, Carvin's Cove, just sort of disappeared into thin air because you had police from the city and from the county were both there trying to block any kind of exit. I guess if it wasn't that person, and we don't know that for sure, of course, but if it wasn't that person, if he had nothing to do with it, then you'd have to say, well, I guess the Mad Gasser was not in a car that night. Yeah.
I want to get to a couple of minutes on the mass hysteria this caused, because we were dealing with a way more innocent society way back then, William, where people took things very literally. They weren't used to practical jokes. They weren't used to, people terrorizing them, so to speak. Sure, there was murders. Sure, there was kidnappings. I mean, it's always happened. But when it came to people plotting some sort of psychopathic gas drugging of people, that just wouldn't have been on the majority of people's minds. So what was the attitude of the people around these areas where these attacks happened?
I think that from what I can tell, it seems that people were pretty afraid, and they took it very seriously. I think at the time, that's something that you can't be prepared for, because nobody had, the only really, okay, this is in the, in early 1930s. The first anybody had ever heard of gas being used to hurt people, kill people, intentionally in that way, would have been in World War I. And, that's, 1918. So, 15 years later or so, that would have been maybe in the memory of some people that they had heard that had happened in Europe during the war, or maybe there would have been some veterans that knew about that, but we weren't in the midst of any kind of situation like that. In Mattoon, 10 years later, in 1944, we were in the midst of a situation like that. And that's where you get one of the other theories that has been proposed a lot. And see, that's what's unfortunate, is for the Virginia attacks to be lumped in all the time with the Mattoon attacks, because you're looking at two very different things in context and in the attacks, the symptoms, the descriptions, everything. There's two very different things. Because in 1944 we were in the midst of World War II, and that kind of thing was probably on people's minds. One of the theories is they call it subliminal fear hypothesis, is that people were thinking about, they had so much fear of Nazis and of, some sort of domestic attack from Germany, that maybe they had created this in their heads and all this. I don't really buy that, but even if you did buy that, you can't apply it to the Virginia attacks in 1933, because there's no war going on, and there's no real reason to believe that. And but I do think that it would have been probably more shocking to people in 1933 than it was in 1944, because who would have thought that somebody would do that, or who would ever expect something like that? And what's more invasive, what's more violating than somebody filling your home with an invisible gas that makes you sick? That's really sinister. It's like being poisoned, it's literally poisoning the air in your home, so it would be terrifying, I would imagine. And I would imagine everybody was pretty afraid.
What were some...
There were probably people...
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say there were probably people also who just considered the whole thing, didn't pay much attention to it, or just considered it pranks or something like that, because it didn't happen to them. But if it happened to you, I think you would think about it very differently.
What were some of the symptoms that people had from this gas poisoning?
Well, yeah, in Virginia, the symptoms were mainly mucous membrane irritation type symptoms, where their eyes were burning, their throats, their nose, they're coughing, they're hacking. But it wasn't limited to that, because some people seem to have a more violent reaction than others. The daughter of the man from the first attack, she had seizures, and she seemed to be sick for days afterwards. Most of the people, once the gas was out of their house, a few hours went by, maybe the next day, they were feeling better. There were people in Roanoke that were complaining of different types of symptoms, with, in addition to the irritation symptoms, that they would have, like chest pains or something like that. There was one woman who was hospitalized in Roanoke, and visited by the county officers, who seemed to think that she was a victim of the same types of attacks in the county, that she might have been just one of those people that was more sensitive to it. But the real question is, like, what kind of gas could do that? What you would have to, have a gas that was strong enough or concentrated enough to affect everybody, and to be able to deliver it into the house. But there are a few theories on what the gases were that they were coming up with at the time, that could have caused that. Things like the first culprit was carbon dioxide. That's what they called it in the newspaper at the time, was chicken gas. And I didn't really know this, but chicken gas, I found out, was carbon dioxide. Well, the easiest form of carbon dioxide to obtain in 1933 would have been dry ice. So dry ice, I looked into dry ice, and I thought, well, can dry ice cause these kind of symptoms? Can dry ice, what would it take for dry ice to negatively affect you? Because people use it in haunted houses, or they use it in, punch bowls and things like that, for Halloween. And then I found a case from the Center for Disease Control. They had listed on their website where a man had bought 100 pounds of dry ice. This is in Florida, I believe. And he had loaded it into his truck. And it was in the summertime. He put it in his truck, and he rolled the windows up, and he started driving home. And he started becoming really sick, overwhelmed by the fumes, but he didn't know what was doing it. And he called his wife and told her where he was, and that he thought he was going to have to pull over onto the side of the road. And he pulled over. He actually passed out as he was pulling over, and just sort of fell out of the car, and his wife showed up. So dry ice can negatively affect you. It can knock you unconscious. It can, and it can certainly, that much highly concentrated dry ice can cause irritation like that. Chlorine gas can cause that too. Chlorine gas was used, in World War I. It was one of the gases that was used early on in the war, that before they went to mustard gas and other types of caustic gases. But chlorine gas can also be, easily made, or chlorine can be made into a gas form. And the police at the time, the county police, and went to the city actually, and got had one of the local chemistry teachers come out, and they made some chlorine gas and exposed themselves to it to see if that was what it was. Just to try to test things, and another one was formaldehyde, was another gas that was suggested. And formaldehyde, we all know formaldehyde is embalming fluid, but formaldehyde is also used manufacturing sometimes, and in furniture, and in engraving, and also in manufacturing of fabric. There was a fabric plant called the Viscose company that was right near Roanoke at the time. That was one of the few factories in the area that would have had, because they manufactured early synthetic fabrics. The formaldehyde's used to I believe it's to make creases in fabrics, like in synthetic fabrics, like more semi-permanent, so that would have been available if the gasser had worked at that factory. It's conceivable they could have smuggled some of that out and used it, and it's conceivable they could have been a sort of an amateur chemist, and were trying different concoctions over time, and seeing what worked and what didn't work, and what achieved the desired effect,
On that note, I'm going to have to get you to hold on right there. William Van Huss is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio. We're talking the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. And we're going to learn more about this, as William will be with us for one more hour. You can go get his book on Amazon online, and I suggest you do, because it's going to be a good one. It's called The Mad Gasser of Botetourt County by William B. Van Huss. Highly suggest you look it up. Fair price. $6 on Kindle. You can't do wrong with that. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. We'll be back with more of the Mad Gasser and author William B. Huss right after this.
Hey, space travelers, it's Joe Roop, your host of Spaced Out Saturdays. Come join me as we explore the realms of the paranormal, the esoteric, and everything in between every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern. You know the truth is out there. Don't get caught sleepwalking. Come join Spaced Out Saturdays. That's every Saturday night, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, right here on spacedoutradio.com.
Psychic Sundays, spiritual communication, ET contact, Sasquatch in your backyard. We will have it all on Cosmic Passport with me, Elizabeth Anglin. Each Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, at spacedoutradio.com, I will take you on a journey of enlightenment. The goal is learning from the soul on out. We'd love it if you joined our experience, Cosmic Passport, heard Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
365 days a year, we're in the field, investigating UFO sightings, talking to alien abductees, and visiting secret military locations like Area 51. We're UFO Seekers, official partner of Spaced Out Radio. Follow our daily search for the truth at ufoseekers.com or like us on social media. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, we're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spacedoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spacedoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Want to learn more about aliens, cover-ups, conspiracies, cryptids, and the paranormal? All you have to do is tune in S4 as we take over Spaced Out Radio Night, starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday night, right after Spaced Out Saturdays. Hi there, This is Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. Join me, Corey Ruiz, and friends as we discuss the hot topics of the night. It's fun, entertaining, and as dark as the night. Find us at spacedoutradio.com.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
There's a lot of strange going on in this world, and we can help you find out what's going on with you. Paranormal, cryptids, UFOs in the sky, aliens in your bedroom tickling your toes. We have the investigators you need to find out the answers you deserve. All you have to do is head to spacedoutradio.com. Your information is 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines report. It's free, and we're here to help.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, we are going to get into fake news. Professor David A. Schultz is going to join us. He is an expert in this field. We're going to talk about the fake news in the mainstream media. Also, in the alternative, we get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and over 160 countries around the world. We're also live on the Fringe FM, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember, the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Spheristike. Spheristike is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, space travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, we are live on Periscope TV, so you can tune on into that. Just sign in with your Twitter or your Facebook account. Would appreciate that. Give our Twitter account a handle as well, at Spaced Out Radio. Use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio if you want to connect live with me during the show as well. You can give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. We are on iHeartRadio in the United States, TalkStream Live. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download and subscribe to our shows on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can shop at the Spaced Out Radio store. You can also read up on the encounter online, rock out to some Bumblefoot, watch great videos from UFO seekers, and Contact TV, and so much more at spacedoutradio.com. Tonight, for this hour, we'll be talking with author William Van Huss. His latest book, The Mad Gasser of Botetourt County. And you can pick that up on Amazon. William is a researcher and author of strange and weird little anomalies that are caused in these small towns. And I love these stories because these are the ones who kind of get dropped off the media. They may have happened 70, 80 years ago, like this one, which was about 60 years ago, but it's still stories that are prevalent to bring back to the future. Wouldn't you say that, William?
Yeah, I think it's these are the things that would be forgotten if it weren't for a few people out there that continue to write about them and try to find answers, and otherwise they'd be left to the dusty microfiche in libraries across the country, really.
Right before the break, we were talking about whether or not, or what the symptoms of the gas were, and whether or not it was a goal to hurt people in regards to this. Do you believe that this person wanted to kill?
I really don't know. I couldn't say if their intention was to kill or not, or if their intention was just to terrify people. Because if in fact their intention was to kill people, maybe that would explain why it seems that there might have been more than one type of gas used, or maybe they were trying to come up with a type of gas that would kill someone. But fortunately, they didn't. But what they did achieve was to terrify an entire county and an entire city. And then, of course, 10 years later in Mattoon, if there was in fact a similar gasser there, then it certainly terrified that city as well. Lauren Coleman, actually, I believe, pointed out another one that happened in Florida, and I believe it was in the 1950s. But there was only one case of it, but it was a very similar case like that, and with gas in someone's house. And actually, I was just reading the other day that there was a story, and this is just maybe a week ago. There was a story in Ohio. Once again, we have Ohio, Virginia, Kentucky, this area here. But there was one in Ohio which really just struck me as like a modern version of this. And I wonder if it's going to continue, and I'm going to keep my eye on it, because if it does, I'll definitely be following that one. But a man was outside on his property, and someone flew a drone down right in front of his face and sprayed a gas in his face that had a very similar effect on him, with the irritation to the eyes and mouth and nose and everything that the gases in Botetourt County had. So I don't know, are we getting a new technological drone gasser? Entirely possible.
Let's go back to when these attacks, the original attacks, when did they end? And did they just end abruptly? Like all of a sudden this dude, whoever it was, just stopped?
Yeah. And I don't really, it's kind of hard to say when this person or people stopped, because I think by the time that it ended, and it ended abruptly, I think by the time it ended, it had turned into the mass hysteria that you hear about. And talking about the mass hysteria, I think that's the reason that Mattoon, you hear Mad Gasser of Mattoon way more than you hear Mad Gasser of Botetourt County, is because not too long after the attacks in Mattoon, a researcher from the University of Illinois visited Mattoon and wrote an academic paper that's been referenced many times over since then on the mass hysteria there, and it was used as a psychological study of mass hysteria. So I think that's why it kind of gets, dismissed as mass hysteria. And when because a lot of times, even if I think his name was Donald Johnson, even he in his paper didn't discount the possibility that there was an actual gasser there, but he really just sort of plotted the arc of the mass hysteria, and that arc of mass hysteria you can see in any sort of mass hysteria situation, or a collective obsession type of situation, which you see in Botetourt County, where it reaches this sort of crescendo, it reaches this big peak, and then for whatever reason, people can't take it anymore, basically, and it drops off. And I think by the time you reach that peak, that the original, at least in Botetourt County, the original attacker was no longer operating, but you had some copycats operating, and then you had people who were just extremely paranoid. So a lot of the last attacks, the very last attacks that happened in Roanoke, some of them weren't really attacks at all. They were just people calling the police because they saw a strange car moving slowly down the road, or they thought they heard something on their porch or something like that, but they didn't actually get attacked. That's not to say that there weren't any attacks in Roanoke, because there were, but a lot of the last attacks were of that nature, where it really wasn't, they weren't as extreme, and they weren't as verifiable, at least. When the police showed up, there was no evidence. But when the police showed up to the ones in Botetourt County, and the earlier ones, you had people who had very obviously been exposed to some sort of gas, and you had a lot of descriptions of vivid descriptions of what happened to them and what the gas was like, and even though the houses had been aired out, you might have some sort of lingering smells. But in the later attacks, there wasn't really anything like that, and most of the attacks in Mattoon, Illinois, you really didn't have much evidence like that either. So I think that once it got to that point, it was just sort of like a breaking point, I guess, that the tension has just built to this sort of, and really thinking about that, the Mothman incident in West Virginia kind of had the same kind of crescendo, really, but it ended in a very physical and very real tragedy when the bridge collapsed, but immediately after that, that was the peak of it. But immediately after that, it just sort of ended. So I think a lot of times it just, there's just this arc to it, and it's unfortunate that when we hear mass hysteria, our first reaction a lot of times is to say, "Oh, there's nothing to it," because that certainly does not mean there's nothing to it. Mass hysteria is just a description of the reaction of the public, of the community, that is being affected by something.
I'm wondering, I mean, we don't know much about who the suspect is, that nobody has ever come forward. Has nobody ever found any clues about this guy? Like there's a lot of people who believe in the West Coast with the Zodiac killer that eventually there's going to be a package that's in a bus depot or something along those lines, or someone's attic of a house that they purchased. Was there anything found that was even some sort of remote clue to what was going on?
Not yet, to my knowledge. It would be great if something came out. It would be great if there were, something like a lot of times we want those things to happen. And with the Jack the Ripper case, which we were talking about a little bit earlier, with that, you have this evidence, you have this baffling situation, you have a list of suspects, none of which really seem like they're possibly the person, but there's obviously something real happening. In that case, it was murder. But then you have later on, what people want so bad, is that diary or something, and you had that with Jack the Ripper, where they published a diary. It's supposed to be the diary of Jack the Ripper, but it's, probably not. And you have, they have the Zodiac and the Zodiac situation. You have the ciphers that the Zodiac sent, that just continue to, baffle people to this day. And you have that one suspect there that, I can't remember his name right now, but the guy that, died before they could really get to the bottom of investigating him. And Mad Gasser, it just seems like he just disappeared into history. And, unless the Mattoon, Illinois case was related. And in that case, then you would have somebody who had 10 years later resumed very similar activity in a place 500 or so miles away. And it's not impossible, but there's not any evidence for that. So probably the Mad Gasser just got away with it in Botetourt County and just laughed to themselves, that they had gotten away with it. But yeah, there's not been any, I've seen an article, I saw an article in the Roanoke Times that came out this past year talking about it, and they said that, I believe it's where they were sort of trying to attribute it to a will-o'-the-wisp or something. But it's not full, it's not ever fully gone away. Every once in a while, it still gets written about in Roanoke and in the area. So I think it's one of those that just like the Zodiac or something like that people will be talking about for a long time. And hopefully I've compiled in this book, what I tried to do was compile, just kind of put all the known data together, put it all together in one place. And for the first time, I believe, put a detailed chronology of each attack and go over the main theories that people have had for those attacks and kind of assess the probability of each of those theories. And there are some that, completely don't apply, but people have used them. One of those was pollution. And that had been proposed for the Mattoon attack. And a lot of these theories have been proposed for the Mattoon attack because somehow Botetourt County gets lost in the mix, even though it was the first one. But in the Mattoon attack, they proposed industrial pollution as a possibility. Well, this is probably because in the 1950s, I think it was 1952, they had that situation in London where that pollution was so bad that these thousands of people were getting sick and stuff. And somebody, thought back to the Mattoon gasser, and they said, oh, well, maybe that was the situation there. But if you look, Mattoon, Illinois, really, even though it had a couple of factories, it was a factory that made diesel engines. Even though, you had a couple of things like that, it wasn't really an industrial town. And, it wasn't like London. And then when you had, and also London was burning tons of coal and things like that. And in Botetourt County, definitely not an industrial town, even though or an area or whatever. Not a heavily heavy industry place, even though you had a couple of factories. You had that viscose factory that made fabric. It was outside of Roanoke there, but other than that, you really didn't have anything like that. A lot less than there is now. So pollution is not and coal. People have said coal, burning coal. And even though Southwest Virginia and, this whole area, this whole region is known for coal, people weren't burning coal apparently as much for fuel at that time as they were wood. Because there was one instance where somebody had reported that they thought they had been gassed, and the police came to the house, and then they attributed it to somebody burning coal nearby. So it was a smell that people that reported that were not really familiar with. So that was in Roanoke, I believe. There's I don't know.
Was there any clues that the police had? Or was this guy just that mysterious that they maybe got a footprint or two, and that's about it?
Pretty much. There was the only clues that were really left that were physical clues were physical descriptions, which were pretty vague because you're talking about you're seeing somebody at nighttime fleeing the house, fleeing the area. You have descriptions of someone getting into a car. You have a description that in that case there's a couple of people because there was somebody waiting in the car. The next day when the police went back in the morning to look for clues because it was nighttime and it was in the middle of the county and there weren't street lights or anything, so the police came back the next day to look for clues. They found footprints there where that car was sitting, and the footprints were of a man and a woman. So there was a couple in that instance, that was at least there at that attack. You had the other instance where I was talking about earlier, where there was a guy who was scoping out somebody's house from across the street, and he was had set up a little camp there where he was watching their house. You had things like that. Then you had the automobile crank that was found at the scene. You had things like that. The other things that were found were mostly just prank things, where somebody had thrown a jar at somebody's house and it had fly killer in it or something like that. There would be, a couple of instances like that, but whatever insecticide fluid was in the jar was nothing like the types of gas that would affect a whole family in a house. So, one of the things that's a mystery is how you would dispense that into a house. How you do that. And at the time, and this kind of relates to one of the arguments of that people gave that have given over the years, that the Mattoon incident was not related to the Botetourt County incident in Virginia. Is that they'll say that the Botetourt County incident was not widely reported outside of Virginia. but that's really not the case because there's an article, I found an article in the New York Times about it, and it was an AP article. So the Associated Press had picked it up and had, when the Associated Press picks up a story, they're blasting that out to all kinds of newspapers. So it's not, it definitely was reported outside the area, and you didn't have to be, only in New York City to hear about it. I would imagine cities like Chicago and other major cities that had newspapers that carried Associated Press stories also got that same story. And in that story, they suggested that maybe it was this person had used a slit gun, which is one of those insect sprayers like you see in the old cartoons with the little handle, and it's like a sort of a real primitive atomizer, and it has a tank there, and you pump it and and it sprays the fluid and makes a gas out of the fluid. That's possible, and I've seen bigger ones like that. I have a few of those. Actually, I picked up recently just to check them out from the 30s, and they have real small tanks on them. But I picked up another one that was really big, and it's probably it's probably 3 or 4 feet long, and it would spray quite a bit into somebody's house. So there's one possibility. Another possibility would be to, I guess, do some sort of take some sort of canister and, in the case of carbon dioxide or like, chlorine gas or something like that, maybe have it in some sort of canister that you put it inside of a window. But we don't have any cases where they found the canister. Some of them would say that there was like in one case in Roanoke there was like a rag that had been stuffed under the door. And then was that to keep the gas in, or to there was one in Mattoon that was supposed to be it was a handkerchief or something that was soaked in some sort of fluid, and a lady picked it up and said that she felt like electricity when she smelled of it and was immediately sick and stuff like that. But when the police came there was nothing on the rag. So, I mean, it's possible it could have evaporated, I guess, but that really wouldn't explain the type of gas that we see in the Virginia attacks. So.
Do you think that this person may have died, or maybe went in the army and got ready for World War II, or maybe got shipped overseas? What's your best estimation of what information you've been able to find out?
That part is just a total mystery to me. I mean, that's one of those things that I've thought about, with Jack the Ripper. Did he go to a mental institution? Did he die? Did he commit suicide? Anything is possible at that point. But that's one of the reasons to keep looking at stories like this and keep turning them over, and maybe eventually we'll find some sort of piece of evidence that tells us. Actually, another story like that I think is more, is a little closer to the Mad Gasser than Jack the Ripper is the one that happened also in the 19th century of Spring Hill Jack in England also, where he was, just sort of like a miscreant that terrorized people, went around blowing like blue flames in people's faces, and then they'd take off running, and then it was attributed to have supernatural ability to get away from people and to jump over fences and disappear into the night. So that's actually closer to a Mad Gasser type of situation, because he's not killing anyone. He was just, he got his pleasure from terrifying people, I suppose, and seeing their reactions. In the Mad Gasser, you can imagine doing a very similar even though you say, well, you might say, well, he's just pumping gas in people's houses. Well, that's not to say that he didn't sit back and watch and see what happened, He didn't, the pleasure from the Mad Gasser may have come when he watched everybody spill out of that house, collapsing into the snow, and then sneaking away into the night before the police came. Because people are incapacitated like that. They're probably, when they're trying to struggle out of the house, and you had people, in some of these cases, there were people that were, losing consciousness before they were thrown out the front door just to get free of the fumes. These people aren't, they're just trying to get safe. They're not really looking for the person, and there's only one place to go, and that's outside. That's outside where whoever the attacker is, So you're throwing caution to the wind just to get away from the gas. So, I could envision someone who was demented enough to do that, sitting back and watching that.
Do you think that this gentleman had family in these areas and that's why he was able to make the treks through? Or do you think he was just picking different areas to kind of spread out his attacks so that way it maybe looked like there were more people?
I would think it would have to be somebody from there. I would think that, I'm no expert on Botetourt County because I didn't grow up there, but I'm an expert on the county I grew up in, and I can, I know the roads, I know the communities, I know how to get from one to the other, and I think they would have to be that way too. And at the time, there was not, there weren't a lot of people. I think Fincastle, which is the county seat, the main town in the county, I believe on the census it said there was 5,000 or so people that lived there. So the rest of the people were spread out throughout the county. The attacks didn't really happen there because that was where all the people were. The attacks were happening in these smaller places like Cloverdale, Bonsack, Haymaker Town, Carvin's Cove, all these little places that this person would have had to have known pretty well, and especially to evade the police like that. And it's not too hard. I mean, sometimes when people attribute some sort of supernatural element to the Mad Gasser, they don't take into account the fact that when I was reading about all these stories and putting all this timeline together, putting the chronology together, one of the things I was trying to find out was how long did it take the police to get there? And in some of these cases, it took the police 2 hours to get to that house. And that's plenty of time to get away. That's plenty of time to just be as far away as you could be out of the county if you wanted to be. But, a lot of, one time they did set up roadblocks and stuff to try to catch them. But, if you know that place like the back of your hand, you probably know a way to get away, So I think it would have to be somebody, in my guess, it would have to be somebody who was in the community, who knew people in the community. I've been told by somebody in the community that a lot of the names of those victims are from prominent families. So these are well-known families in that community. Not all of them, but some of them. And, of the earlier ones, which are probably the ones that are most attributable to the actual Mad Gasser. So I would say that the person who was actually doing that probably targeted specific families, may have gotten it wrong a couple of times. He may have intended to go to the Henderson household when he went to the Huffman household, because they were next to each other or because one was on the other property. But I would say that it was somebody who, in my best guess, I do, like I was saying earlier, I put the facts out there, and I'm not trying to sway anybody to believe how I believe, but in my best guess, it would have to be somebody who probably had an axe to grind with somebody who may not even have some people in that county who may not even have known that they did them wrong. But they felt that they were wronged by somebody and had an axe to grind with them and wanted to terrorize them around Christmas time. And that's what they did.
What was the distance between the locations of all of these attacks? Were they able to be driven to in a day, 2 days back then? Because let's face it, back then, automobiles were still driving on mainly gravel roads.
Yeah, there were most of the attacks, at least the earlier attacks. I think that the later attacks, like I said before, I believe the later attacks, like the ones in Roanoke, most of them are probably not attributable to the original Mad Gasser, at least, and some of them are probably not, really weren't attacks at all. They were just paranoia. But of the original attacks, they were all but in one instance, one or two instances, they were spaced out. So it would spaced out radio. They would be spaced out when one day and then the next day, or 2 days later, or 3 days later, or so there weren't multiple attacks on the same night, except for a couple of instances, and one would be that one in Carbon's Cove. And in that community, it seemed like the Gasser, I think he hit three houses in that one night, which also makes me think of Jack the Ripper when he did 2 murders in one night and ran from one side of the neighborhood to the other side, and led everybody on a big chase. So that's kind of similar, really, because he did like 3 in one night in this Carbon's Cove area, one of which was a very prominent citizen, and whose brother was a policeman in Roanoke. So of the ones like that, those are pretty close together. Other ones, I think that, I don't know the mileage from Haymakertown to Cloverdale, but those weren't done in the same night. So there was a road called Collin Road that a couple were done, I believe, on one night, and then the other one was the Carbon's Cove, and those were really tight. Those are kind of, together. You could easily make your way around that community in one night. And then in Roanoke, those were, in the city, and the city wasn't as big as the city is now. So most of it's in the old section of the city. And if whoever was doing that, be it the original Mad Gasser or copycat later on, those would have been pretty easy to navigate too, even though they were clustered together a bit more.
At what point did these events just stop, and were police given any clues as to why they just ended?
It was in February. It began in December 22nd was the first one. And then it was mid-February when it really just kind of trailed off, and there were a few, and then all of a sudden there were none. Police didn't really have any clue about why it ended, but at the peak of it in January, there were a lot of, there was reward offered, and there was a meeting held where a new law was introduced, and the law is still on the books today, and it specifically addresses introducing gas into somebody's home, and it has a penalty of up to 20 years for if that gas causes harm to or takes the life of anyone in the house, any person, animal, or bird. It says, oddly enough, in the law, but that law was introduced, in the middle of this, and I think that was used to curtail it, and then the police from the county had gone to the city, and when they went to the city to do some experiments on which kind of gas might be used, they were interviewed by the newspaper in Roanoke, and the police were clearly afraid at that point of the hysteria that had been developing. So we're talking about mid to late January at that point, January 20 something, and the main policeman that's involved in almost every circumstance. The special officer Lemon was his name. He put it out there and said, somebody's going to get hurt. We're going to have to calm down, everybody. Stop, because there was 3 instances in the county where somebody had fired a gun at somebody running away from their house. So it was a point. It had come to a point to where it was very possible somebody was going to get killed, and whether or not it was the Mad Gasser or some teenage boys trying to play the Mad Gasser, trying to play a hoax and just preying on somebody's fear, but people were really afraid, and it was, there had been some reactions. You can't really, 1933, going on some farmer's property and messing around their house when everybody's afraid of this kind of thing that nobody's ever seen before, extremely dangerous situation. So, it had come to that point, and then by the end of, by February, things had died down in the county, but once they, the ones in Roanoke, all the attacks in Roanoke started happening, and the reports, most of the ones in Roanoke were not attacks. They were people reporting suspicious characters around their house or suspicious people. These things get reported all the time, like burglars or just people lurking, So it could have very well been that some of the ones that would have been reported anyway if somebody lurking around their house are attributed into the Mad Gasser, but just because that situation was going on at the time. But there were Gasser incidents in the city of Roanoke as well. But when they all abruptly stopped around the middle of February, there was no clue of why it began or why it ended until 10 years later when it started again in Illinois in a very similar fashion. And in that case, there's no, even though that one only lasted like 10 days, the Mattoon episode, there's no clue about the beginning or the end. It's just as if this mysterious terrorist disappeared into the night and disappeared into history and somehow made his way, her, or their way out of there without ever being captured.
Have there been any modern cases of this? Because there always seems to be, people who try to resurrect some sort of copycat crime. So have we seen any attacks since then up to this date?
Well, there's the there was one in Florida that the one that I think that it was Lauren Coleman that pointed that one out. I read the article, but it only happened once. I think that I'm not sure, of the date on that, but I'm thinking it was in the 50s. Then there's the one that I told you about that is just about a week ago that I heard where somebody was using a drone to spray gas into somebody's face in Ohio, and this is in a small town, little township in Ohio, and this is just a week ago. So, I could definitely envision somebody doing that more than once, because what easier way to escape there than to people are using drones for all kinds of things, and also in Ohio, recently they've been using drones to drop drugs into, fly drones over prison walls and drop drugs into to the prisoners. So I could definitely foresee if somebody wanted to use something like that to terrorize people. I mean, you can be pretty good with it. You could actually get, fly off without being tracked very easily, unless somebody knocked that drone out of the air. But I'm keeping an eye on that one to see if that actually develops into something, into some sort of spree. But it would be a sort of a technological extension of that same kind of crime. Hopefully we wouldn't end up with a mass hysteria type of situation with that. But I at the beginning of our talk, I was talking about how this story is relatable to us now, not only because it's since 2001, the terrorism has been on has been a very much more prominent thing in the news, and this is definitely a domestic terrorist situation with the Mad Gasser, but also because of the mass hysteria. And I think that mass hysteria in today's world, with our especially since the more people are connected, these people in 1933, 1934, 1944, were not connected in any way like we are today, of course, with our instantaneous worldwide communication, with 24-hour news and social media, things like this. It's much easier for things to go viral, and essentially that's what mass hysteria is. It's when paranoia goes viral. And I think we kind of end up when paranoia or a collective obsession goes viral. Today, in our news, in everything, where you see that arc of mass hysteria all the time. Once you can identify that arc, you study a couple of these classic cases. You study your Salem witch trials, or the meowing nuns, or the Mad Gasser. You see this arc of mass hysteria and how it starts, how it abruptly ends, and then today we see that arc and the abrupt end and an immediate beginning of another one. It's not separated by decades anymore, or it's not separated by distance or time anymore. It's as if mass hysteria is almost a constant disease that we suffer from in our society now. And I think it can maybe to read stories like this can help us see it more, because when you're in it, you don't see it.
Do you think that this is a community that has ever, healed from this, or are there still people in the communities that are that are still survivors or relatives of survivors that are, trying to still put these puzzle pieces together besides yourself?
Well, I would, I know there are still relatives, and I've spoken to a few people in the community who, who had heard of the case. There's plenty of people that had never heard of it. And I've spoken to people who said that they had relatives who lived next door to somebody who was attacked. So there are people there. I mean, my grandparents would have been the age, to have been adults at that time. All my grandparents have passed away, but there may be still some people who are alive that remember from when they're a little tiny child, hearing about it or something. But there's been such time passed now that it's hard to say. But that's one of the things that it would be nice to come across. We were talking about, having one of those moments where you have more evidence, or some piece of evidence comes out that suddenly cracks the whole case. That's one of those things that is still possible, because there are people who may still be alive, or have just passed away recently, or in the last 10 years or 20 years or something like that, and maybe they're maybe eventually their relatives go through all the little boxes and things in their estate and find some personal recollections, find some evidence. There's no reason that it couldn't exist. Because there are a lot of addicts that have been cleaned out.
William, we only got about 4 minutes left with you tonight, and thank you so much for being on the show. Are there any survivors of these strange attacks alive, and have you had the opportunity to talk with any of them?
I don't think so. There are people who, this is 1933, so you're talking. About 80 years or so. Mm-hmm. So the only people would be relatives of these people now, who would, I haven't had the opportunity to speak to any of the relatives, but I'm sure there are some. I'm planning on going there, soon, and, trying to do that actually. It's one of those things that it just takes time, and it takes a lot of legwork, and it's just like culling through a mountain of old microfiche and newspapers and things like that. It's sometimes it's tedious, but I'm hoping that I can get in touch with some people who are relatives of family members who have firsthand, or family members who had firsthand experiences. I've heard, I've heard from a couple of people that have that knew somebody who knew somebody, But as far as getting that direct contact with somebody, I've not yet been able to do that.
Quick question. Quick question coming in from Twitter from Quantez at Spaced Out Radio. He's asking, do you think the mass hysteria helped or hurt the case?
Well, I think it hurts. I mean, it helped in a way, because if Donald Johnson hadn't written the paper on mass hysteria in Mattoon, Illinois, then the Mattoon, Illinois case may have been completely forgotten. And with the Mattoon, Illinois case, the Botetourt County case would have been most certainly forgotten, because it's usually just sort of added as an afterthought to the Mattoon case. even though it's a much richer story to find evidence in. So in that way, pointing out the mass hysteria in it, and from an academic perspective, I think helps the case survive the decades. But it hurts the case ultimately in a big way because of people's what people think of when they think of mass hysteria, and that's basically, because I know, I'm a very open-minded person, and I've written and read about UFOs and other subjects that many skeptics completely dismiss. And I know that when I heard the phrase mass hysteria for years, I would just assume like, oh, okay, well, I guess nothing happened. It was just people. It was a psychological thing. People got out of control. There's no real element to this. But really, when you look at these things, at a lot of these mass hysteria cases, there is something, real. It's, mass hysteria is just the reaction of the communities that it affects to the actual incident. And I think that's what hurts it, is because, there's mass hysteria. And in that time, when you look in the newspapers, you would see that. You could see the skepticism set in, and you could see people, when the mass hysteria hit, they're like, oh, everybody's getting gassed now,
Absolutely.
It was kind of that, there was that mentality and stuff. So I think that,
right.
I think the mass hysteria ultimately hurts it in that way.
My friend, it is that time for us to wrap this up. Please tell everybody where they can buy your book.
It's available on Amazon.com in paperback and also in Kindle format. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dave.
William, anytime. Love the stories. Cannot wait for the next one. Let me know when it comes out. We'd love to get you back on.
I will. I'm working on it now.
All right. William Van Huss, make sure you go to Amazon, pick up his book, The Mad Gasser of Botetourt County, on Amazon once again. The Preacher coming up in hour number 3 with me on Spaced Out Radio, and we also have The Thought of the Dave.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
There's stories, then there's the truth. Do any of us really trust the news anymore? This is Jamie Sexton, owner of Rebel Planet News. The third Thursday of every month, I appear on SpacedOutRadio.com to bring you the truth you deserve, without mainstream media lies or alternative media fear-mongering. We'll get to the heart of the story and deliver the truth you're seeking. So come join us here for the Rebel Planet at SpacedOutRadio.com.
We're lighting the void on Saturday nights on Spaced Out Radio. Hey, this is Joe Roop, and I'm hanging out in SOR headquarters every Saturday night, bringing you the latest news when it comes to the weird and strange. Bigfoot, occult, UFOs, ghosts, and everything in between, I got you covered. You can tune in to SpacedOutRadio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. Come travel into the void with us on Spaced Out Saturdays.
Not ready for bed on Saturday night? Right after Spaced Out Saturdays, hop on over to S4 with Corey Ruiz and me, Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. With S4, there are no limits to what we try and uncover. From government conspiracies to helping clean up the paranormal, no topic is safe on S4. We get to the heart of the matter, of the subjects you want to learn more about. So tune in on S4 starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, only on SpacedOutRadio.com.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
Hi there. I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Do you want to know the truth? Do UFOs exist? Are aliens real? Are the governments hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO seekers, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow along with us as we journey across the United States, visiting UFO hotspots and alien hotspots, trying to document the UFO phenomenon. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
There's a lot of strange going on in this world, and we can help you find out what's going on with you. Paranormal, cryptids, UFOs in the sky, aliens in your bedroom tickling your toes. We have the investigators you need to find out the answers you deserve. All you have to do is head to spacedoutradio.com. Your information is 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines Report. It's free, and we're here to help.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories.
It's Cosmic Sundays with me, Elizabeth Anglin, in Cosmic Passport. Let me take you down a 3-hour spiritual journey where we will get into everything from ET contact to Psychic Sundays. It's a journey of listening and learning together with some of the best professionals in their fields. You can tune in to Cosmic Passport at spacedoutradio.com every Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, we have Professor David A. Schultz joining us. We are going to get into the debate of fake news. Yes, fake news. Both on the mainstream media side, on the alternative media side. We're going to hit it all tomorrow night starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and over 160 countries around the world. We are also live on the Fringe FM, the High Plains Talk Radio Network. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to revolution.radio and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Spheristicky. Spheristicky is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio to connect live with me during the show as well. You can watch us live as you can right now on periscope.tv. We are also on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR. On Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Give our page a like. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. That's where we store our archives. And, of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. Rock out to some Bumblefoot. Shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. Read up on the encounter online, as well as you can also watch great videos from UFO seekers, Contact TV, and so much more at spacedoutradio.com. For hour number 3 tonight, we bring in our resident scientist, Mr. Eric Markham. We call him the preacher around here. And we are going to continue the talk of legends, weird creatures, and see where this goes up till the thought of the Dave. Preacher, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Not a problem, my friend, not a problem. It's always a pleasure to have you here as well. Now, for the first 2 hours, we did have author William Van Huss on the show, and we were talking a lot about the Mad Gasser, which, it really terrorized that northeast, a bunch of states there in regards to the way this person or persons was going around gassing just innocent people inside their houses. I mean, that takes a real sick and twisted fellow to do that.
Yeah, it's obvious he was getting some kind of perverse pleasure out of, screwing with these people is what it sounds like. Whether he intended to have them die or anything like that, it was obvious he was getting off on the, the confusion or the stress he was putting them through.
But yet there are so many strange things that seem to happen in that Virginia, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio corridor that just really defies logic. And scientifically speaking, it's got to be difficult to try and put your head around so many strange creatures and sightings in those areas.
Well, there's still a lot of. People think of Ohio and they think all these huge towns, and you think Pennsylvania, and you think of Pittsburgh, and you think of Philly, and how these big metropolitan areas. But truth be told, there is still a great deal of wilderness in that corridor we're talking about, especially West Virginia. You can drive for miles and not see a town of any kind there. So there's places for a cryptid to hide or for a person to hide. If you got somebody who just wants to be on the lam, they could find plenty of hiding places and live off the land there.
No, I fully agree. And I mean, you start off with Mothman, that was seen around an old bunker that used to house chemical-type weapons, and you think, wow, that's very interesting how that coincides, and it makes you wonder, whether or not that was some experimentation gone wrong, or if there was something supernatural with it, and then the Silver Bridge collapses, and everybody blames it on the Mothman. So, I mean, we are dealing with some things here that are a little bit out of the norm.
Well, yeah, and with Point Pleasant, that place went where the Mothman sightings happened. That place went from having a fairly decent economy to when they shut down the munitions factory, where some of the first sightings were seen, because once they shut the factory down, that area became sort of a Lover's Lane type place. You know, you'd go to park there, and you know that's where I think that's where one of the very first sightings happened. So, but once that was pretty much that town was one trick pony. Once the munitions factory shut down, there was no place else to go for work. Now, a person I've worked with who grew up in that area says that basically, in her opinion, the Mothman was an attempt to get some kind of, crypto tourism started. I kind of disagree, because I don't think the era that happened, crypto tourism was on anybody's mind. Stuff like that was still being poo-pooed, and look how they were denying Bigfoot out in California. That just wasn't something that I can imagine the city fathers say, hey, let's create a monster. So I think there's more to the Mothman story in that area than what my coworker thinks.
No, I think there is something a little bit more to it as well. But, I mean, on the flip side, you do have to wonder, because, I mean, they have a week-long Mothman festival there now at Point Pleasant. I mean, it brings in, probably $1 million to $2 million or more in tourism revenue. Now, I'm just pulling those figures out of my head here, so don't quote me on those, but it's become very big business, this incident, even though the sad part about it was, this is all based on, 30-some people, 40-some people dying when the bridge collapsed.
Yeah, and you have that photograph that supposedly shows the Mothman perched on one of the spans of that bridge days before it happened. And I've seen that bit. There's something, that picture, you can see something on that span, but there again, it's that grainy, far off black and white. Now, the thing to remember, the Mothman Festival itself is only 17 years old. So it was what? When did the actual Mothman things happen? What, back in the 70s?
Back in the 60s.
I'm not.
Yeah.
So it took them a while to turn it into a cash cow. Now people probably either read my article or have heard me talk about the Dewey Lake monster back in Michigan, in the area in Dowagiac, Michigan, where I grew up. And I lived right there where that happened. They are just now starting to turn that into a cash cow. I think with the advent of the supernatural TV, things like Monster Hunters, Never Finding Bigfoot, these kind of shows, people are looking at their local myths and legends and saying, hey, there's money in this. I know they're having a Dewey Lake Monster Festival now. Somebody has opened up a microbrewery, and there's a Dewey Lake Monster Ale or something like that. The people are instead of denying or hiding what's going on with these cryptids in their area, they're embracing them and trying to make a fast buck off of them.
And you can't really blame them for doing that. I know here in British Columbia, Harrison Hot Springs, which, was a hotbed for Sasquatch activity here in British Columbia, they have a Sasquatch tour every year. They have or at least they used to have a Sasquatch conference every year, and it was massive. It was something that they could be proud of. And when these communities hook on to these cryptid legends, why not make money off of it, whether they are real or not? I mean, the fact is, these legends come from somewhere. Some people are seeing them, some more credible than others, but I mean, you can't deny the experiences.
No, and I mean, we can't, when you get the deniers that say, oh, it's just hysteria, or, I'm sorry, but there's thousands of sightings of these cryptids every year. They can't all be delusional liars, okay? Just statistically, if you look at how many eyewitness accounts there are, some of those have to be true. They can't all be misinterpreted, whatevers, what the excuse that they always give. There's more to it than that. And to think that we know everything that's alive on this planet is ridiculous. We're finding new species every day. So it could, well be that these cryptids, maybe they're smarter than the average bear, and they just know how to avoid being, seen by us if they don't want to be seen. That's another thing that I don't think we ever take into account. Not we as, SOR people, but as, a race, we never take into account that we might be dealing with something that's as smart as we are, if not a little smarter. So that never seems to figure in. It's always this creature, this animal, they always assume that it's, like a chipmunk, a cryptid chipmunk or something as far as its brain goes or its mental capacity. So there's obviously way more out there than we know about.
Well, I mean, if you skip over to Ohio, the first reports of the frogmen came from police officers.
Well, yeah, there's that one. There's the one down in Lizard Man down in South Carolina. Now, a lot of people think that the woman who showed the police her car all eat up, I guess that's improper grammar, how they come the next morning and her car was just destroyed. People think that's the only eyewitness account and that was proven to be some pit bulls that were trying to get her cat. That's the one witness that they pull out to discredit all the other sightings that came before. There's been, that Lizard Man thing has gone way back. It wasn't just that one time with that woman's car, but that will that will become the one that the mainstream media hangs on. And once it's discredited, well, all South Carolina Lizard Man sightings are, fake. And that's, we know that's not the case. The Ohio Grassman predates the Ohio Grassman, which is a Bigfoot-like cryptid. It predates anything Patterson and Gimlin did. So when they say that, Bigfoot is was a invention of the West Coast media, that's wildly inaccurate because we had sightings of these creatures recorded as far back as the Spanish explorers who the first Europeans to come to the New World. They saw these creatures and they wouldn't have confused it with a grizzly bear or something like. I've said this before. They knew what bears were and they described these things in their journals, and they are not bears. They're huge bipedal hominids. So these things have been around far, they predate our modern media.
Question coming in from Catalina. Do you think some cryptids are experiments in labs gone wrong?
Could be. I mean, you can't rule that out because I know some of the research that was going on 25 years ago. where it was at with some of the stuff they were doing at Vanderbilt. And that was open research that you could, find in peer-reviewed journals that was groundbreaking. God knows what they've done in these hidden labs for 20 years. And what was known and what you could, what was open and, in the light of day was amazing as far as trying to regenerate limbs or, finding growth factors to make embryonic germ cell levels become certain organs. This stuff was on the brink in the 90s, mid-90s, early 90s. So I'm sure there's an escape something. Not all researchers are heartless SOBs, and who knows, somebody that cared for one of these lab creations let it loose instead of euthanizing it like, most research animals are done. You get done with the animal and it's sacrificed, light way to put it.
I think that a lot of these creatures are some sort of supernatural being that we just haven't been able to put the science around just yet. That being said, we do know through people, if we take them at their word, that there were some sort of, weird experiments going on at Montauk back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, right up until I believe the 70s and 80s, before they closed down that base. There's also been strange activity reported around, once again, going back to Ohio, around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and including, I remember when we had guest Jim Thomas on a couple of years ago, where he was having grays at his window literally the day before when we were going to have him on the air as our guest. And, he's a retired firefighter who had friends who were firefighters at Wright-Patterson. And I remember Jim telling us a story that the firefighters at Wright-Patterson were told that if certain buildings burn, it doesn't matter if there's people in there, you do not go in there. You let that building burn to the ground or put it out as best you can without going in. So is that just some sort of, secret space program type craft? Is it time travel the way Andrew Bashago said it was? Or are there some sort of experimentations coming from underground at Wright-Patterson? We don't know. The base is that protected. I mean, it's like a public Area 51 facility, where people can actually look at it rather than being hidden. So it's very intriguing on everything that is going on around those areas. I mean, Dogman, for instance, you barely saw a report about Dogman, and then all of a sudden in Wisconsin, which isn't that far away from Ohio, okay, Dogman appears out of nowhere. The Beast of Bray Road. It made Linda Godfrey's career.
Yeah. Well, one of the intriguing things about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is they have the National Museum of National Air Force Museum. Anyhow, it's the Smithsonian of the Air Force. So it is a very public base. It is you can get on there, go to the airport, the Air Museum, like Pensacola down in Florida. You can go. You just drive through the gate and go to it's the National Museum of Naval Aviation now. I've watched that grow from a Quonset hut with about a half a dozen warbirds into it to a world-class Smithsonian-style museum. So if you're going to hide secrets in a place, they always say hide them in the open. And one thing to consider is the Walker people, Navy spy ring aside, the military takes its secrets very seriously, and they might have, there's a mundane explanation for letting those areas burn. There's nothing there more, exotic there than extreme, top secret, eyes only type of information that they wouldn't want out. They'd rather have the facility burned down than to have these secrets divulged.
Yeah, I fully agree. But I mean, let's get to people for a second here, Everett, and we'll talk more about the creatures here later on. But people who have these experiences, whether it's Goatman, Dogman, Cadborosaurus, lake monsters, Bigfoot, it doesn't matter what the creature is. These people who have these experiences, a lot of the times, are not taken very seriously, especially if it's outside of the realm of the normal, okay? I would put Bigfoot on top of that list, by a distant second, Dogman. I mean, yes, people in the cryptid world know what Dogman is, and it's probably more popular these days, but in reality of the public, I don't think Dogman can even touch Bigfoot on a popularity scale. And I guess where I'm going with this is we see people all the time who see something strange, whether it's Frogman, whether it's Goatman, or whatever. How do we believe them? How do we take them seriously when a lot of people, Eric, as you know, because you've listened to enough of these shows with us, they're traumatized by what they saw, and maybe not scared, but traumatized by the fact that they cannot explain, or they're afraid to explain what they saw for fear of people treating them like they're absolute crazy people.
Well, and it seems like the media tries to find the kind of person that we would look at their outer appearance and write them off because of stereotyping first. There was a guy here in North Carolina a few years ago, probably not 20 miles from where I'm sitting, who had a Bigfoot experience. And, this guy had probably had about a 5th grade education, and he dressed like somebody that just, lived in a log cabin by the stream, and he spoke like one. And the whole festival atmosphere about, a local man saw Bigfoot. They did the news story in such a way to make the guy look like a buffoon. Now this man, and of course he didn't help himself by having sort of I told it to go away and it went, it took off, that kind of thing. But there are Bigfoot sightings in my area. There's a lot there, there are a lot of cities around here, but there's also a lot of wilderness, a lot of lakes and a lot of rivers. So, it's prime. There's even some caves. So it's really good cryptid habitat here. But these people, some of these people, you see them and their eyes are haunted. You very rarely see them. That's not the ones they catch. But when you see those people, it's obvious they've seen something. And it wasn't somebody dressed up in a suit. What they saw literally haunted them.
Well, I mean, and you're right, and I apologize. I said Everett, not Eric. This is why I just call you Preacher. There's too many damn E words around here, or E names.
That'll work.
Yeah, now we got Eric with a K in the Spreaker chat room now. That's all we needed was another Eric. But we will, we'll figure that out. Hold on, people are asking, in Periscope, am I feeling better tonight? Yes, I am much better. Last night I was almost down with a migraine, and I was really struggling on camera last night because my eyes were just about to pop out of my head, but I survived. I kept them nailed in, so it was good. I got lots of sleep last night, so it was a rarity for me. But anyways, thank you for your concern, Chris. I really appreciate that. The main thing about the crypto field and realm, though, is these people, when you see their eyes, like you mentioned, these people are traumatized by what is going on. And I think where they take a lot of harassment, Eric, and I see it in my area here, where we have a lot of Bigfoot. Okay, we do. But we have hunters out here who've been hunting this area for 20, 30, 40 years, who've never seen a print, never had an experience. They know this area like the back of their hand, and nothing ever happens. Do you think a lot of the experienced outdoors people are not having these experiences because they're looking for other things? Maybe deer, rabbits, birds, cougars, bears, or whatever it may be. Doesn't matter where you are in North America, there's a lot of experienced outdoorsmen out there not having experiences.
Yeah, I think if you're deer hunting or, whatever you're hunting, that is what you're focused on. And a lot of the, deer hunters in this area, we actually I grew up, we actually stalked deer. Now, the deer hunt, you find a tree and you sit in a stand and you hope one wanders by. So the way people hunt may also be hampering their seeing anything. So there was a pretty cool, I'm thinking it was somewhere out in California, or might have been down. Anyhow, it's not important where it was, but the guy was in his deer stand, and a Bigfoot walked through the area that he was scouting out. And it was, he was up above its eye. Obviously he was high enough up in the tree that he was up above its field of vision, and it went strolling through the area that he was staking out to go deer hunting in. He said he didn't even think about limbering up his gun or, taking a shot at this thing. He saw it, and that, please go away were his thoughts. He didn't want to have any kind of encounter with this creature.
Well, it's intimidating.
Like you mentioned before that, they seem to know if you're carrying a gun and avoid you. And I'm sure that they've got, it's just like humans know that you don't go walking around the woods in Baldwin, Michigan during deer season. People get killed every year out there. So they probably know that during certain hunting seasons, it's best to avoid the places humans go.
Well, I mean, you have to take the local scenery on where it's at. I know, for instance, come hunting season in my area, during rutting season, which is at the end of hunting season, if you see a male buck wandering around, you're best to go the other way and not even approach them. Sure, they look great with the antlers, and you might want that picture or something along those lines, but that's when they are their most dangerous, and you have to know the times of the year when that happens. I think when it comes to Bigfoot or something along those lines, I think we are dealing, in the sense of Bigfoot, dealing with a creature that is very, very smart. I don't think a lot of people give it enough credit. There's a reason why it's the reigning hide-and-seek champion. You know what I'm saying? But, I mean, for creatures like Dogman or Frogman, but if you take some of the lesser knowns, Frogman or the Goatman or whatever, right? I mean, these creatures just seem to pop in and maybe not be seen for the next 40, 50 years. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of mystery that goes behind what people are seeing. And when you have a creature that isn't as regular as seen as, say, Bigfoot or Dogman in the Midwest, it gets a little complicated, Eric, for people to believe these sightings people are having.
Well, if you take the tradition of the Fae, or fairies, as they're popularly known, these creatures and, members of that, I don't know how you'd actually call them, but just the Fae in general seem to pop in and out of our plane, that this isn't where they normally live. And I almost wonder if things like Goatman or, some of the one-offs like the Dover Demon, maybe these things just pop into our reality. It's like, oh my God, how do I get back home? Or, they disappear. They're one-offs because they're not here on purpose. Maybe Goatman ended up here somehow. You know, for all we know, Goat Man, the one that was sighted up in Kentucky, was a scientist in some parallel universe or another planet whose invention popped him to Earth. And that's why we just tend to say, oh, it didn't exist, or it was a bunch of drunk rednecks, when there's so many other, equally viable, if we open our minds enough, equally viable reasons that something like that might show up.
Well, it is difficult to say the least, because with a lot of these creatures, I mean, I think of the stories that our crypto historian Rob Morphy used to tell us from Earth's Mightiest Bastards, when he did his monthly show here on the program. And, some of these cryptids that people are seeing, it's absolutely ridiculous. It really is. I mean, this is right out of comic books. And yet some of these creatures actually do leave evidence. But it makes me wonder, and I think of the story, Eric, of, the supposed story, alleged story, I should call it, of the Sasquatch in the Nevadas, the northern part of Nevada, where there was a forest fire, that he walked out of the forest fire and up to the crew who gave it medical attention. Then a white van pulled up and they brought the creature inside that van and they drove off. And eventually people who were fighting that fire, the forest fires, were told, not to mention this event even happening. So it does make me wonder if there is something governmental to that. Now, I realize, that sounds like a sexy story, can't prove that it happened, okay, but there are a few researchers out there who are adamant that it did. So I'm just wondering if a lot of these creatures, when those strange reports come in, are actually picked up by government officials who go investigate the area.
Well, yeah, we've had that debate before about what vested interest would the government have in keeping Sasquatch secret. And one of the things people will say, well, why? Well, they wouldn't go through all that effort. Let's not forget that the government tends not to choose its battles wisely, and somewhere along the line, a bureaucrat decided that, other than, to not have to give this thing status of some kind, let's maintain the deniability of its existence. So I think we're looking at more of a government, not so much a cover-up. It's just like the total government ineptitude. Somebody 40 years ago said, no, we can't let this out, and it's been perpetuated, and there's probably a little cabinet position, there's a little bureaucrat job somewhere that has to be filled to maintain secrecy of Bigfoot. So it's self-fulfilling. That's not the word, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's like there's a vested interest in somebody keeping it secret just because they don't want to lose their job. And that has come out, that whole thing about the Mount St. Helens Bigfoot, that's come out by more than like one or two sources. There's several prime sources for that claim.
Well, tell people about that, because there may be listeners out there who haven't heard the Mount St. Helens stories.
Well, after of course, I think there was like 14 people died, and when they were trying to clean up the aftermath and the resulting forest fires, there were supposedly Bigfoot corpses found, which, in a way, kind of, I have a hard time with that, because I would have thought we knew, as out of touch with nature as we are, we knew that the volcano was going to erupt. So I find it a little suspicious that Bigfoot, which is supposed to be much more in tune with its environment, didn't know. But that being aside, there were bodies, and they were, rapidly covered up and hauled away. And there was supposedly some eyewitness reports of, burned but living Sasquatch that were given, rushed off in ambulances, and which, when you look at the size of a Bigfoot and then you look at the size of an ambulance made for humans, I mean, there's a lot of the story that's plausible, but then when you stop and think about it, can you imagine this 12-foot or 10-foot creature whose feet are hanging out the end of a standard ambulance as they try and get it, undercover? So I would think there'd be more sightings of it. So there's enough squawk that there might be some fact here.
So my question to you then is, do you think a lot of these creatures then are either some sort of dream or supernatural happening, or maybe some sort of alien being that got caught by someone's eyes?
That's as good an explanation for some of these one-off cryptids as you can come up with. We most of us, I think, agree that we have ET visitors coming here, and it could well be they're a survey team, and one of them gets seen. So that would explain some of these one-off. There's things like Trunco, supposedly this furry, white, almost whale-sized creature that was fighting off the coast of South Africa with a couple killer whales, and it eventually was killed. Now, did the story come, and it's been nothing like that has ever been seen again. Now, did the attack story come after they found the body on the beach? Did they make a narrative to explain this? Because sea mammals, when they die and decompose, it's nasty, and it looks like a big blob of white hairy stuff. It's the collagen within the fat. So do you have a situation where something is, after the fact, they make a narrative to supply why the body they found is there? Or do you see something you can't quite explain and then you make the narrative fit the evidence? That could be some of what we get with these one-off cryptids. They're trying to make a narrative that fits what they saw after the fact.
I just find it very interesting because I like to believe people. Maybe people will call me naive when I say that, but I like to believe people. Maybe because for so much of this I want to believe, but when I add in my own experiences, what I have experienced, there are just certain things that I want people to sit there and say, to me, I believe you. You know what I'm saying? I want people to say, I believe you, Dave, because I have no reason to BS about anything that has happened to me. Hell, I started this entire show because of these experiences. And thank goodness we had an audience that was kind enough to say, you know what, this guy's genuine. This guy's telling the truth. And I think that's all important with what is happening in this field. And it often makes me wonder, if that's just what it is when it comes to people, is they just want to be believed as well, even though they have no idea with what they're seeing, or even if they care if it's supernatural or alien. Because let's face it, most people who are not indoctrined in this type of research like we are, they're not going to know what the hell they're looking at or whether it's alien or not.
Well, and that's not, there's a rise, like Joe Roop was saying, there's a rise in people who are actually delving into the occult and delving into, conjuring things up. Maybe, some of these cryptids that we see, Dogman or something, they might be something that was conjured out of another dimension and got away from the person who conjured them because they didn't know what they were doing. There's an esoteric answer. There's the mundane, they were genetic experiments. There's a lot of different layers, and you can almost find justification and validation for each one. And I think for the most part, we tend to believe, like you tend to believe people who've had ET experience and Bigfoot experience because you have had personally ET and Bigfoot experience. I tend to believe the people that have had ghost experiences because I think we tend to give the benefit of the doubt more easily to experiences that we ourselves have had.
Add gnome with the comment of the day. When gnomes fart, do they float? I don't know. I really don't know. But that made me laugh. That one made me laugh today.
Do they float prior?
Do they float prior? I don't know. Do they light them? I have no idea. We're going down a bad road here right before we get to the thought of the Dave. This is good Bumblefoot, man. Little Cuterebra coming at you with the thought of the Dave. Every single day, I post a question on my Facebook regarding to the topic of the night. Tonight, we were talking about the Mad Gasser of Mattoon with William V. Huss, the author. And, of course, we bring in the preacher, Mr. Eric Markham, our resident SOR scientist, to come on in to talk these strange cryptids. And I think this is a great question. It didn't get the response yesterday's did. I mean, yesterday's question about the witches, I mean, people were still going off on that today. I don't quite understand it, but move on, people. That post was 28 hours old. Anyhow, today's Thought of the Dave. Tonight on Spaced Out Radio, we have William Van Huss coming on to talk about the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Are there any strange creatures or legends that live near you? If so, tell me about them. Now, we only had a few people respond, but some really cool answers. Tessa responded, well, in her area, there is Bigfoot, UFOs, and skinwalkers. The adventures around here seem endless. Skinwalkers basically do ceremonial magic. Not all natives can do this. Some were bestowed the gift innocently as their mother's life was lost during childbirth. Others take the darker route by intentionally taking a life. These skinwalkers can take the form of anything that have taken a life of, or they have taken the life of. I have seen them in the form of wolves, which we have no wolves in Cortez, wherever she lives. I think it's Colorado where she lives. The most disturbing one I saw was along the Navajo Trail on our way south to Phoenix. First, we saw a white and red truck on the side of the road, lights on and doors open, no one around it. Then less than a mile down the road, facing away from us, stood an unusually tall, blonde woman, arms almost reaching her knees, hair a mess, and with her belly protruding from her stomach as if she had just eaten the majority of a human. It was quite disturbing, yet unbelievable that such magic still exists in this modern world. That's a little eerie. Nothing eerie about that, seeing tall alien blonde chick with a gut hanging out like she just pounded back, a Brontosaurus burger.
I think I'd be heading the other direction. Yeah, I would definitely be heading the other direction if I saw that.
Oh, my goodness.
Elizabeth Anglin had a really bad skinwalker. Matter of fact, we went right by on our way home. She took me through the area where she had her skinwalker encounter. And I'll tell you,
fill us in
they
on
were
that.
lucky to have gotten through that.
Fill us in on that.
Oh, it was her. I don't remember everybody else that was involved. It seems like it was her and her brother, or her and another psychic friend, and they were coming through this area. And it's a rural 2-lane road. And this skinwalker started chasing the car, like in a werewolf shape. And the faster they would go, it would be just as fast, and it was keeping up with them. And this thing supposedly has a history. It chases you, and it can easily do damage to your car. So you go faster, and it's dangerous because the area is curvy roads. So what it does is basically tries to get you to go fast enough to wreck yourself. That way there's no proof that it caused, because supposedly nobody survives the accident, and they got through that area, and they have a pretty good idea where that person lives. So it's kind of a freaky situation to go back through there.
Yeah, that would make me poo. I'm not gonna lie. That would make me definitely soil my shorts. I'm not gonna lie on that one. Ugh.
Yeah. If you're in a soft top Jeep, you're in a Jeep with a soft top. Yeah.
Yeah, you're dead. You're dead.
I don't. Yeah.
Let's get to Sandra on Vancouver Island, who says Cadboro Bay sea monster, or Caddy. So the Cadborosaurus that seems to patrol between the southern tip of Alaska all the way down to the northern tip of California, but mainly hides around between Oregon and British Columbia. This has been seen. A lot of people think it's one of those oarfish that just seems to go on for, 30, 40, 50 feet. However, people are seeing things, and the latest sightings were dated back, as Sandra says, to the 1990s. But, this is a creature that was seen by people who would be fishing or trolling off of the west coast of Vancouver Island and down the coast through Washington State. Didn't seem to go in between the islands, because there's a lot of islands in the Gulf on both sides of the border. But Cadborosaurus, that's a good one. In fact, a lot of Cadborosaurus sightings also seem to happen in the area where the sturgeon are, around where the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean meet. So it's very interesting about Caddy. Got to wonder what happened there, if the killer whales finally got rid of them as they're hunting great whites now. I don't know. What do you think, Preacher?
Oh, yeah, they definitely hate the pelagic, which the more free roaming killer whales are known to actually hunt down and kill. They suspect, zoologists expected this behavior, because dolphins will do it too, but they had never, until last year, it was either 2016 or 17, they actually filmed a killer whale just devastating a great white. It was, Bambi versus, it was sort of a Bambi versus Godzilla thing. So, anything that killer whales are very smart. They work in organized hunting, they have organized hunting strategies. And if there was a large creature that they perceived as a threat, they would have no trouble, taking it out. So if Cadborosaurus has disappeared, it might have been lunch for a pot of killer whales.
Well, this goes, there's a little bit more in British Columbia here. And Keith said, we'll go to Keith first. He said he just moved north in July, so he's clueless. But when he lived in southern Illinois, the Wampus cats and Bigfoot-type creatures, older people used to refer to them as boogers. So, we're getting into the Bigfoot thing again there. But Matthew Smith out of Toronto says the closest to seeing something while he was living on Vancouver Island was the Cameron Lake monster. Now, I got to tell you this. If you ever go to Vancouver Island, you go to the boat mid-island, not even mid-island, and you get to a place called Parksville. That's where I started my radio career. And then you hang a hard left, come off the highway, do the whole circle around, and you head towards a place called Port Alberni, which eventually the highway takes you to Ucluelet, a fishing community, and then Tofino, which is known for a lot of surfing in British Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful place. Anyhow, along the lines of going from Parksville towards Port Alberni, you have to pass Cameron Lake. And Cameron Lake, when I lived on Vancouver Island, my buddy and I fished that 3 or 4 times back in 1999, 2000, and we had never heard the rumors or anything. In fact, I didn't know there was a Cameron Lake sea monster until shortly before I started this show. Scared the living hell out of me, man. And by the way, if you continue like another like half a mile past Cameron Lake, you come to what they call Cathedral Grove, where you have all of this old growth forest where the trees are like 300-400 years old. And they literally are, 200-300 feet tall, some of them. One of them is like 38-39 feet around. It's like the redwoods in California. It's just absolutely beautiful. But this Cameron Lake monster, man, I'll tell you, I've now swam and fished in 2 lakes that have sea monsters. Now that I do this show, I'm never going back, because you could throw the Ogopogo from Okanagan Lake in there too. I don't know what it is with British Columbia. We got Cadborosaurus in the ocean. We got Cameron Lake monster. We got the Ogopogo. I think there's another couple around here somewhere of these monsters. I don't know what it is with this territory, but apparently we like our sea monsters here, buddy.
Oh, I'd love to get with that guest you had on that says he knows where Ogopogo hangs out, and the water being as cold as it is, I would use a dry suit, but I'd dive. If he thought he knew where it was, I would dive to see it, to try and gather evidence. I'd get a DNA dart. I might disappear as lunch, but I'd give it a try.
No way, man.
I'm too old to die young. I might as well go out having hunting a cryptid.
Well, you know what? You still have to go diving in North Carolina there and go get me a couple of megalodon teeth. You made that promise to me, man.
Yeah, that'll be next. That should be coming up around July sometime. I think we do the Meg Ledge dive.
That's going to be awesome. I look forward to that. Adnome says, I live down the street from the real Exorcist house where the true events actually happen. It's funny, it looks like a memorial house, and yet it's creepy as hell. And then he goes on to say, also, my brother-in-law worked on the hospital that had to do with the actual person. They shut down the floor and gutted it shortly after the real exorcism happened, never to be opened again. He said he had to go in there to pull wires. He's an electrician. He's also a Navy veteran, and it scared the living hell out of him. Yeah, when you're dealing with the devil, that's just never any fun. We got time for a couple more here. Mark, otherwise known as Bazooka Joe, says, Dave Scott, you are a legend and you live by me. Really? Really? You went there? His wife followed up, strange creatures. Does my husband count? John Northcote from British Columbia here mentions Cadborosaurus on Cadboro Bay, and then the Ogopogo, of course, Sasquatch. Michael McNeil says the buried treasure that's over that mountain, somewhere on the Oregon coast. We got lots of treasure around up here as well. Preacher, thank you so much for joining us, man. It is
always a pleasure.
It is that time. That flew by. Flew right by. I don't understand how it goes so fast sometimes, but apparently it does. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.
I'll get you to hold on. I also want to say thank you to William Van Huss for being our guest in the first 2 hours tonight, talking about the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. What an interesting story that was. You can go on Amazon to pick up William's book at any time you like. I always like it when our audience supports the authors we bring on this show. Makes me feel good. Tomorrow night on the program, Professor David A. Schultz is going to join us. We're getting into fake news, both on the mainstream media side and on the alternative side. How can you tell the difference? What's real, what's fake? 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time, tomorrow night at spacedoutradio.com. We want to say, that we do have our GoFundMe account going on at GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night. That's GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night, as we are trying to raise funds to build a terrestrial radio studio. Your help would really benefit what we are doing here on a nightly basis to make this show bigger and better each and every night. Don't forget, you can follow us on social media, periscope.tv. We are on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show, Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR, and of course our YouTube channel is youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio, where we store our archives. I want to say thank you once again to all of you listening at home, in your vehicles, at work, wherever you may be. To everyone on Periscope, thank you for joining us and giving us the hearts. On Twitter at #SpacedOutRadio. Some quality snark in there tonight. The Veterans Club, the SOR Space Travelers on Facebook, doing a great job once again. And on Spreaker, thank you so much for being with us. You guys make it all worth it, because we're going to do it again tomorrow night. Because together, my friends, we own the night. I will talk to you in 21 hours from now. Have a good one. We're out. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. See ya.